Okay, so I'm looking through the Patrick Herbert website and just finding what seems to me to be really great information. And I found this article which I just started reading, and it just seemed like really good information, really interesting. And I just thought I could make a video on it. So I haven't read most of it, but I just thought it would be fun to read this to you today. The article is called "Weaponizing Germ Theory: The Remarkable Dr. A. Fauci," and it kind of just goes into more about Dr. Fauci that I guess isn't commonly known. But um, it says dramatic political and social decisions are being made across the United States and around the world on what emergency quarantine measures and other steps must be taken. In many cases, the radical and severe measures, such as shutting down the world economy, are being justified by COVID 19 case projections of morbidity into the future. If there's one person who is the face of the current strategy of dealing with the coronavirus in Washington, it is the director of the U.S. National Institute for Allergy and Infectious Diseases, or NIAID, of the NIH, Dr. Tony Fauci. What major media conveniently leaves out in discussing Fauci's role is his highly controversial and conflicted history since he first joined NIAID in 1984 during the beginnings of the AIDS pandemic. His role then sheds valuable light on his remarkable and highly controversial actions today. Tony Fauci, a leading member of the White House Coronavirus Task Force, is being promoted by major U.S. media such as CNN, MSNBC, or the New York Times as the great expert on all related to the COVID-19 outbreak. Yeah, and this just intrigues me because I've taken the stance that whether we want to argue that COVID-19 is a major issue or not, I mean, obviously it's a major issue because it's been made to be a major issue, but regardless of your opinions on the virus itself, these policies have drastically affected our society. And so I just think that anyone who is in charge directly or indirectly of public policy, which is so impacting on our society, should be scrutinized, and we should make sure that these people know what they're doing and that they're objective and have good intentions and are qualified. Because I understand that that we can have scientific or medical experts, which information from them might be of great value to inform policy during times of pandemic. I get that, but again, these people aren't elected. It would be way too easy for someone to create a pandemic. Like, we know that that's very, very capable, very much a possibility. And so we just have to put in safeguards into our society to make sure that people can't create a pandemic with the intention of policies to change society, or they could have other intentions too. So I don't see how that's even debatable. I just think that we should really be maintain a healthy skepticism with these people, make sure that they're legitimate. So anyway, it goes on. He had dismissed the president's efforts to promote a known malaria medication as treatment for severe corona patients. Sorry, let me just start over. He had dismissed the president's efforts to promote a known malaria medication as treatment for severe corona patients as anecdotal, even though 7 years before he backed the same drug. He has publicly taken projections from an institute created in Washington state by the Gates Foundation, the same foundation that virtually owns the WHO, or the World Health Organization, and owns major stakes in the leading vaccine makers, to claim that up to 200,000 Americans could die from COVID-19. And I think at this current time they're saying upwards of almost 400,000 have died. This is from December 17th, 2020. Anyway. Fauci stated that COVID-19 is probably about 10 times more lethal than the seasonal flu, which would mean 300 to 600,000 coronavirus deaths this year. At the same time, in a respected medical journal, he compared COVID-19 as similar to seasonal flu in morbidity. And this makes sense to me because, I think it should be obvious to everybody that, again, regardless of your opinion on COVID-19, regardless of your opinion on the virus itself, Fauci has given consistently inconsistent information on pretty much every stance involving COVID or anything really. Like, he gives extremely contradictory information to himself. And again, whether you think this virus is a huge concern or not a concern, that in itself should be very concerning or very alarming, that this person who has so much power over these policies, it keeps flip-flopping. It's like, I don't care what your opinion on COVID is, that should be a big red flag. So, but anyway, so I just don't understand why more people don't see it that way and don't look as closely to these people who have apparently so much power now. When questioned how long the shutdown of much of the U.S. economy must last, Fauci replied only, when there is 0 new COVID-19 positive tested cases. Something impossible given the defective testing. Right, and that's the thing too that I've heard of, that when you're testing people who have no symptoms, there will always be certain people who test positive who either don't have the virus or just have maybe remnants of it, who have already recovered, or who can no longer transmit the virus. So basically, just statistically, it's impossible to have 0 cases. And so there's only 2 possibilities. Either Fauci knows that and he wants the lockdowns to continue, and so he's saying this by design, so that these policies will last into perpetuity, or he doesn't know that and he's just been completely reckless and ignorant and doesn't know what he's saying and what he's doing. That's how I see it anyway. He has also been backed. He has also backed direct human tests of novel vaccines with no prior animal tests, including with radical non-tested mRNA gene-edited vaccines. And again, that's another issue where I don't care what your opinion on the virus is, whether it's a huge issue or fabricated or anywhere in between. The fact that all these tests and vaccines are being pumped out and not going through the normal testing, to me, is alarming. And that we just because there's this crisis or apparent crisis doesn't mean that you can throw all your rationality out the window and jump to such extreme measures. Like, we still need to make sure that we're doing everything accurately and taking the proper steps to ensure that we're not acting rashly, basically. Again, that's just my stance, but apparently that's crazy. Fauci has more influence over U.S. national policy on the unprecedented COVID-19 pandemic than anyone, including the president. Much of the media treats him with awe as an unimpeachable scientist, one of the world's finest. A closer look at Anthony Fauci's career gives a starkly different picture, a very alarming one, in fact. Yeah, so I'm curious to hear about this. America's AIDS czar. That's a good headline. Tony Fauci has held the top post at the I don't even know if I'm pronouncing this correctly, but NIAID. He's held the top post at the NIAID in Washington for an astonishing 36 years. So kind of like a czar. Today, he is well past retirement age at 79 and holds the funds to determine which drug companies or university researchers will get precious government funds or not from NIAID's annual $5 billion budget. And something I was just thinking is, like, wherever you find a lot of money, there tends to be some corruption or potential for corruption. So I think that's pretty standard. Let's go back to 1984 when Fauci was named head of NIAID during the Reagan era. That year, an AIDS researcher, Robert Gallo, working under Fauci, held a press conference to announce that he had discovered the AIDS virus. He said it was HIV, human immunodeficiency virus. The shocking announcement, which went all over the world, was in complete disregard of scientific procedures. Sorry, I'll keep this lower so you can read along if you want. Was in complete disregard of scientific procedures of prior peer-reviewed, published scientific evidence, including the required electron microscope analyses. So again, just jumping to conclusions, not going through the normal procedure. It was a case of science by press conference as a critical science. Professor Peter H. Duesberg described it. Duesberg was an award-winning researcher at Berkeley who isolated the first cancer gene through his work on retroviruses in 1970 and mapped the genetic structure of these viruses at this link, which I'm not going to go to right now. For Gallo and Fauci, that was unimportant as millions in research funds flowed into NIAID to research the new virus, HIV. Fauci and Gallo claimed that AIDS was highly contagious, also by sex. And, okay, I gotta stop here, sorry. But I've just noticed a lot of parallels between COVID and AIDS. I mean, part of it is just like, yeah, there's a new virus and we don't understand it, so that's kind of reminiscent of AIDS. Also, New York was a major epicenter, reminiscent of AIDS. Also, though, and this gets a little bit conspiratorial, like as an astrologer, it was interesting to me because the first AIDS case was identified. The first AIDS case identified in the U.S. was, I think it was in California, although it might have been in New York, but it was in the year 1980. And the first COVID case in the U.S. was in 2020. And so that gets into this long subject, which I've actually covered in prior videos. Basically, just about how this year I guess last year now, in 2020, we had a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, and it happens every 20 years. So similarly, in 1980, there was a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, and in 2000, and before, earlier in 1960, 1940, 1920, 1900. And it just seems interesting to me that every time, and again, this might sound conspiratorial, but every time there's a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction year, every 20 years, we have some kind of new weird virus or pandemic. Even the Spanish flu kind of loosely fits into that. I think that was a couple years before 1920. But yeah, so that just seems very suspicious to me. That, okay, this is gonna be a huge interjection. I'm just gonna keep going, I guess. But just that, I just think it's suspicious. Like with AIDS, they said it came kind of like COVID. It came from an animal in some semi-remote region, subtropical or tropical region. So with AIDS, it came from a monkey in Africa, and with COVID, it came from bats in Southeast Asia, supposedly. But I just find this suspicious because, I think it would be very unusual for new viruses to emerge, naturally speaking, just because, European people had contact with Africa for well over 100 years before the AIDS virus. And so I would think that any virus that was already prevalent in Africa would have already spread to Europe and Asia or the rest of the world way before the 1980s. And so that's where I'm just a little suspicious. I know that vaccines had a part in it, that Europeans were vaccinating Africans and they knew about bacteria but not viruses, so they didn't really clean their needles properly, and that's what kind of propagated AIDS. So that could be part of it. But I just don't, again, I'm not a researcher, I'm not a scientist, but I just think it's unusual for these viruses to mutate so frequently in the modern era, especially in such a pattern, like a recurring pattern of exactly every 20 years. It seems very suspicious to me. And if you see where I'm going with that, it seems possible to me that these are created artificially. And especially because like this article saying that there's so much corruption centered around these viruses that and that's where you have to be careful with it, is because yeah, we want to treat the virus, but we also don't want to be manipulated, because these viruses have a lot of impacts on society, ones which could be predicted beforehand, and that makes you think, well, maybe someone would have reason to make a virus like this. But anyway, so I'm going to keep reading. Let's go back to 1984 when Fauci... Oh, wait. Okay, I think I read that already. Yep. For Gallo and yeah, I read that already too. Okay. Fauci and Gallo claimed that AIDS was highly contagious, also by sexual transmission, especially among homosexual men. Notably, before the Gallo claim to have found the HIV/AIDS virus, NIAID had been doing research on the role of drugs, poppers or nitrites, proven immune suppressants, in the deaths of the earliest AIDS patients. That was quickly dropped in favor of researching a cure for AIDS, which we still haven't found any, and similarly, I doubt we're going to find any real cure for COVID. Like, I know that we're rolling out vaccines, and that vaccines are now being, at this time in January 2021, people are now having, like regular people now have access to the COVID-19, but I almost want to predict that it's not going to help, that maybe they'll say not enough people took it or whatever the case is, but I just don't see this going away anytime soon. I really strongly feel that, and I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong, but anyway, I just want to put that out there. Okay, so that was quickly dropped in favor of researching a cure for AIDS. Media was told that AIDS was the public health threat of the century, so kind of hyping it up. Although I understand it was a big deal for sure. I don't want to downplay that. Gallo went on to make millions on his patented blood test for HIV, despite the fact that the test was often giving false positives. Wow, that sounds familiar. And did not test directly for the alleged virus, but for active antibodies, something immunology practice said was not valid, as antibodies merely suggested a past infection response and not necessarily presence of HIV. At this time, in the 1980s, Fauci was responsible for AIDS research at NIAID, a post he still holds. False tests. The issue of HIV/AIDS tests is central. While a frightened world was clamoring for a test, Gallo and Fauci promoted their deeply flawed tests of antibodies. In 2006, Gallo claimed HIV tests were highly accurate from the time they were developed in 1984 and have become much more accurate over time. Highly accurate in 1984, but much more accurate than highly over time. Gallo added in response to criticism, a PCR test for the presence of the virus itself can accurately determine a child's HIV status. Right, so why can't we do the same for adults? In a sharp rebuttal of the Gallo claims endorsed by Fauci and the NIAID, as well as the CDC, Robert A. Giraldo, MD, and Etienne, I don't know if I'm saying that right, D. Harvin, MD, the scientist who produced the first electron micrograph of a retrovirus, pointed out that both the ELISA and Western blot and a genetic test, the PCR or viral load test, the two major tests used to determine if one has AIDS, are invalid. None of these tests detect the HIV virus itself, nor do they detect HIV particles. They added that there are more than 70 different documented conditions that can cause the antibody test to react positive with an HIV infection. Among the false positive cases are influenza, the common cold, leprosy, or the existence of pregnancy. Yeah, and that reminds me, another similarity between HIV/AIDS and COVID is that they all have very much varying symptoms, where there's no, like, there may be one or two symptoms which kind of link cases, but at the same time, you might not even have those when you supposedly have the disease, and you also might have totally different symptoms. So I guess they're somewhat unique or notable among the illnesses that humans get, in the regard that there's very little pattern when it comes to the symptoms from these viruses. So kind of weird. The same tests, and this false positive thing with the test. But anyway, the same tests are used today to determine SARS-CoV-2 positive. They concluded the fact that after 25 years of intense research, HIV has been neither isolated nor purified in terms of classical virology indicates to us that the infectious view of AIDS as a contagious viral disease is based on an apparently non-existent microbe. Wow. Yeah, that sounds really familiar. Giraldo and De Harvin declared the alleged existence of HIV was asserted from the study of proteins. But I want to interject that at this point, I do, like, HIV is a real virus, and so is COVID, so I don't want to downplay that. Like, you always have to downplay that over and over again whenever you talk about these things, because, yeah, people do die from these, and you don't want to downplay that. But at the same time, you know, a lot of this is scientifically unfound, and there are people who want this to be a bigger issue, who purposely either literally make it a bigger issue and purposely make it spread more, make it worse than it has to be, but also make it seem worse than it actually is. And that's what I obviously have an issue with. Okay, so they declared the alleged existence of HIV was asserted from the study of proteins, reverse transcriptase activity, or RT, and RNA fragments that were found in culture supernatant, not from the direct analysis of purified viral particles. The CDC requires a positive antibody test for HIV to determine AIDS in the USA. Yet in Africa, okay, that's interesting, because I was just saying the HIV thing mostly because I know that in Africa it's a big deal, and you know, that there it is a sexual thing, but it's also just passed from mother to child, like, because it's so prevalent there, or that's what I thought anyway. But yeah, in Africa since 1985, the World Health Organization requires no HIV test or any other laboratory test. Merely the patient's symptoms that can include weight loss, chronic diarrhea, prolonged fever, persistent cough, and such symptoms endemic to chronic poverty, malnutrition, and lack of sanitation. Okay, well said. Whoops. Yet this fraud has shaped the career of Tony Fauci for more than 35 years. Fauci, as head of NIAID, has taken millions from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, as well as the Clinton Foundation, along with tens of billions from U.S. taxpayers for this bogus research. Suspiciously, the 2006 article by Geraldo and De Harven was suddenly retracted by the journal in 2019, just before the coronavirus Wuhan outbreak. Weird. Despite the fact that he knew the established rules of virology, Fauci, as head of NIAID, recommended the Burroughs Wellcome chemotherapy drug AZT as a preventive drug for HIV-diagnosed patients, even without symptoms. Burroughs Wellcome gave NIAID the study that was deliberately biased for AZT. Fauci even backed AZT for pregnant women despite the grave risk to the fetus. Yeah, he does not care about public health at all. He doesn't care. Like, that to me is just so obvious. I don't know why more people don't see that. One mark of pregnancy in all women is a higher level of antigens, as the natural immune system fights any infection to protect the fetus. AZT, or Retrovirr, a failed leukemia drug, has been proven to be a highly toxic drug. It was approved for AIDS testing in a record 5 days by Fauci and the U.S. government in 1987. Today, despite more than 30 years funded research and billions of dollars, no effective vaccine for HIV/AIDS exists. Yeah, but you can get a medication which you have to take every day for the rest of your life, which seems very suspiciously profitable to me. Like, I mean, again, I think it should be pretty obvious that any medications that really do solve issues, especially ones that are cheap, that's not what we're told about. That's not what's promoted by organizations such as these or people such as these. They don't care about that. They just care about the most profitable drugs, and they don't care about whether it cures the disease or makes people less healthy. I mean, if anything, they want people to be sick, so they keep getting more drugs. And again, this should all be pretty much common knowledge that big pharma behaves like this, and that Tony Fauci is kind of linked to that. Fauci and Gilead. I don't know how to say this. A lot of words in this, actually, but according to people who have studied the role of Tony Fauci as head of NIAID, his focus has been what is called scientific reductivism, described as a 19th century style single germ theory for a complex web of factors that collapsed the immune systems of a subset of gay men in the early 1980s. Right, that there's more factors here that they just throw out the window. Makes sense to me. He has refused to explore the documentation that a variety of lethal drugs and other toxins such as nitrites could play a role. As a result, he has wasted tens of billions of taxpayer dollars since 1984 on dead-end experiments. One of his most nefarious was his collaboration with Gilead Sciences. Not satisfied with having developed a false positive test for AIDS and having gained FDA fast track approval for AZT to treat HIV positive patients with serious illness symptoms, Fauci decided to collaborate with Gilead, as in the biblical balm of Gilead. Okay, that's interesting. I want to look up. I don't know what that is, but I want to look that up after this. On what came to be called PrEP experiments. Fauci in 2007 began to finance clinical trials of the AZT drugs in HIV negatives, on the theory the chemotherapy would protect them from becoming positive. That is, testing toxic HIV drugs on otherwise healthy persons to ensure they never got AIDS. If it sounds mad, it was. Gilead supplied the drug Truvada to NIAID between 2007 to 2012 for phase 3 human tests on HIV negative subjects. 4 tests, and again, not only does it sound crazy, but it sounds very profitable to me. And again, it's similar to COVID, where you're giving drugs or treatments for people who don't have any symptoms of any of the disease. 4 tests, and it's just suspicious that there's so many parallels between two seemingly unrelated viruses. I mean, one is like a flu. Well, I guess they're both kind of like a flu, but one is, more like a flu, more like a pneumonia, and one is an STD. But both are lethal because, of course, they'd have to be to get such attention and such funding. I mean, they seem like they should be so different, and yet there's so many parallels that it's just really suspicious. 4 tests of at least 2,000 and up to 5,000 test subjects each were done. The project was called Pre-Exposure Prophylaxis, or PrEP. Healthy subjects were given doses of chemotherapy drug Truvada on the thesis it could prevent them from one day getting HIV positive. CDC, in its May 2014 recommendation, urged physicians to prescribe Truvada for negatives in the so-called risk groups, an official government imprimatur for an extremely profitable drug. The FDA ignored 2 of the 4 Truvada tests that had failed and been halted. Despite that, and owing to data manipulation by Fauci's NIAID and Gilead, the FDA approved the dangerous Truvada for PrEP. Today, Gilead lists the side effects of Truvada: kidney problems, including kidney failure, worsening hepatitis B, too much lactic acid in your blood, which can lead to death, severe liver problems, which can lead to death, bone problems. Yeah, that's the end of the list. But they state that Truvada can help reduce the risk of getting HIV-1 through sex when taken every day and used together with safer sex practices. So yeah, high risk, low reward, I guess. The Fauci-Gilead scam of promoting Truvada for healthy people to reduce risk of HIV is a marker for the level of medical malpractice and in some cases evident criminal abuse of human health that the current White House coronavirus guru A. Fauci represents. Yeah, complete disregard for life and for truth. Fauci and COVID-19. So this should maybe be some juicy stuff. In October 2019, Fauci and his NIAID got $100 million from the Gates Foundation to develop gene-based therapies for HIV and sickle cell disease. That means Fauci still, to the time of the first claims of novel coronavirus in Wuhan, China, Fauci was still promoting a 35-year fraud around HIV. Fauci is also part of the Gates Foundation cabal. In 2012, Fauci was named one of the 5 leadership council of the Gates Foundation created global vaccine action plan. And again, it might sound conspiratorial, but like whenever I hear global anything, any kind of global organization, I always get a little bit suspicious, or it's kind of a red flag for me. But this is highly relevant to his role today as the Trump administration coronavirus pope. And that kind of touches on the fact that this is sort of a new religion, and part of the new religion, that science is becoming the new religion. Not that I'm against like valid science, obviously, but incorrect science or misleading science, or a better word would be manipulative science, is the new religion. And it has a pope, I guess. But has his NIAID or any other laboratory in the world rigorously with electron microscopy isolated and purified samples of patients tested SARS-CoV-2 positive for COVID-19? Or are the virus proofs as faulty as Fauci and the AIDS clique have made for HIV? In addition, NIAID is working with Gilead to conduct phase 2 human trials on Gilead's drug remdesivir as a potential treatment for hospitalized adult patients diagnosed with COVID-19. And again, they're completely disregarding the already approved, much cheaper drugs, which are arguably more effective at treating COVID. But a coincidence? Relevant also is the fact that all top scientific advisors to the U.S. President's task force on COVID-19 are tied since decades to the bogus and destructive HIV/AIDS research and propagation of false theories. Alongside Tony Fauci of NIAID stands Deborah L. Birx, MD, Obama appointee as U.S. Global AIDS Coordinator, who worked under Tony Fauci at NIAID from 1983 to 1986. Robert Redfield is the current director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, center of the recent coronavirus testing scandal. Redfield co-founded with the discredited Robert Gallo, former Fauci colleague in the AIDS scandals of the early 1980s at NIH, the Institute of Human Virology, based at University of Maryland. Redfield and Birx also co-authored numerous scientific articles on purported HIV vaccines, none of which have been effective. Fauci, Birx, and Redfield, all incestuously complicit in the HIV/AIDS frauds and malpractice, today hold the future of not only American public health, but also of the entire world economy in their hands. Not a good situation. As their work on the proved HIV/AIDS fraud shows, the coronavirus tests do not at all prove presence of a deadly virus in any patient. If this is so, it is perhaps the greatest criminal fraud in medical history. And then it says F. William Engdahl is a strategic risk consultant and lecturer. He holds a degree in politics from Princeton University and is a best-selling author on oil and geopolitics. I might want to read that. Exclusively for the online magazine New Eastern Outlook. So not only does this person seem pretty well credentialed, but also the people he cites seem like pretty legitimate sources of information. So anyway, I just thought that was maybe worth sharing, and I'm going to keep looking at this site because it seems like there's a lot of good stuff here. So thanks for watching. See you later.